Now Micah Miller trying to spring a pass ahead. Nobody in front of Jack Paling. Moves on with a blast and scores! Jack Paling with
We aren't giving up on chances, and we just got to bottom line execute.
Waits, passes in front, great save, Pelosi, as she robs a Gopher in front of her, and that was number 8, Kippen Keller, on the grade A opportunity.
For me as a coach, that's the kind of D you're always looking for, because they don't grow on trees for sure, and he's done a really good job being a captain of a really young team this year.
It was a really cool thing to see for them to really appreciate what I've done on and off the ice.
to the far half wall. Jack Paling trying to play it into the corner. Now Paling turns, squares his body to the slot, sends it up high toward Jack. A shot makes its way through, and they score! Right along the blue line, Nick Paling was in front of the net, and St. Cloud State's got a lead here in the
And welcome back, Huskies Warming House Podcast fans. It's episode number 24. Nick Maxon here along with Noah Grant. In today's episode, a former Hall of Fame Husky hockey player joins us on the podcast. We'll run up some of the biggest stories around college hockey as well as the NHL. But first of all, in today's opening draw, first of all, Noah, how are you doing this afternoon here on the Saturday morning afternoon for those who are keeping track of time?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I don't know how you're doing. I want to make sure that you didn't just have a little malfunction in the old circuitry upstairs. I know you're getting old, but I'm doing all right.
There's always a malfunction, just a matter of when and how. That's the way that things work, man.
And how frequently it happens. I definitely feel it. I took a nap.
That's true.
I feel a little groggy, but other than that, it's been good. I've been working out. I lost 8 pounds in the last couple of weeks biking and stuff, so I'm feeling all right.
Not eating those cheeseburgers every day, huh?
I actually think we're having cheeseburgers for supper tonight. Saturday, August 15th, we're coming to you live, so gonna update.
It's a Phil Kessel cheat day, right?
Oh, every day. But yeah, Saturday night, gotta update you, of course, on some NHL stuff. But before we get to that, Nick, some housekeeping procedures, like you mentioned. The opening draw is what we're gonna call our housekeeping procedure from here on out, coined by Nicholas Maxon, yours truly. First of all, our trivia segment, we have our hats finally going out to our first 6 winners of the trivia contest. We're super excited to get those out. One of our winners lives in California. Nick, you're definitely paying for the postage on that one.
100%.
Yeah, so we're excited about that. The other thing that's we're excited coming our way in terms of shipping is we have new shirts coming in for the Huskies Warming House podcast that are currently being made as we speak, hopefully to give away to our welcome listeners. So, Nick, I don't know about you, but I'm excited to keep the train rolling, as they say.
Yeah, exciting stuff. Find it good to get those hats out to our first few winners. I know that the trivia segment has been a lot of fun. A lot of people have been engaged in that. So nice to see those folks finally get rewarded for all their hard work in answering those questions. And some new fun stuff coming up later on with those T-shirts, Noah. But we'll keep that between you and I for a future episode as well. So yeah, a lot of good things happening.
Yeah, and speaking of the trivia question, Nick, why don't we jump right into it for this week's trivia segment?
Two Line Fan Trivia is your chance to win. Follow the Huskies Warming House podcast on Twitter @WarmingHouseDen. A new question will be asked every week. Be the first to tweet us the correct answer. Winners will be mentioned on the show, as well as a chance for prizes and more. One question, one answer, one winner. It's Two Line Trivia.
Two-Line Fan Trivia, of course. Be the first to answer. You're going to win one of these babies. Kind of a cool gig. New hat, you shall win. And it actually involves our current guest that we had on this week, Dave Reichel, who was the 3rd leading scorer of all time in the pre-Division I era at St. Cloud State from 1930 to 1987. Since moving to Division I, who is the all-time leading scorer in Division I St. Cloud State men's hockey history? Nick, do you have any idea on this one?
It's got to be Dave, right? And the question is, how many points was it, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of points here. So let me pull it up here. Our winner was actually our colleague, Sid Wolf. Her Twitter handle is @SidIsAWolf. She has some pretty fire tweets when it comes to hockey time in the St. Cloud area. So definitely give her a follow. But Ryan Lash was the correct answer. He's the all-time leading scorer from 2006 to 2010. 183 points in 79 games. Yeah,
That's a lot.
I believe he's still playing overseas professionally, maybe Frölunda or something like that. He's definitely still playing for sure. I'd have to fact check that. Second, of course, is Jeff Satterdahl and then Garrett Rowe at 179 and 178 respectively. So Sid, you are our 6th trivia winner. You're going to get your hat sent to you next week. And thanks for participating. So if you want a new hat and potentially a new shirt or something else that we can conjure up, I don't know, Nick might drive to your house personally and give you a social distancing hug. I'm not sure what it'll be.
I can just do that here. I don't have to drive.
Every Saturday at noon. So that's all I got for you, Nick.
That's awesome. And I think with that, Noah, it's time to get into Center Ice View News and Notes.
Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
And Noah, getting into today's top stories here from the Center Ice View News and Notes, as you mentioned before, not related to Huskies hockey, but certainly a decision that probably can give us a little bit of some scary thought moving into the future. The NCAA Division II announcing the cancellation of fall competitions and championships, which then forced the NSIC conference, one that St. Cloud State most athletics do participate in, to cancel fall sports and any sports competition until the end of December, essentially till January, Noah. And this does not directly affect Huskies hockey especially right off the bat, but it doesn't really give a whole lot of confidence as to, where this thing might end up. There has been still not an official announcement either from the NCAA Hockey Division I, from the NCHC, from what we understand. But as far as student athletes are concerned, I can't imagine that Huskies hockey would be the only sport playing on campus. I could be wrong, but this does not bode well for Huskies hockey fans for this fall.
Yeah, definitely programs around the country, not only St. Cloud State. Obviously, you look at the Big Ten pushing back football as well, and all of these programs moving to either a spring start date or something of the sort. It just really does not bode well for a lot of sports, but who knows, maybe hockey might get pushed back to November. I mean, we don't really know where we're going to be in a couple months. Maybe hockey will start on time. We just really don't know, but like you mentioned, not looking good, but hopefully, especially for those seniors, David Rennick, Tyler Anderson, guys like that, you're hoping that both the men's and the women's side get a chance to play their respective seasons.
Could be a truncated season nonetheless, maybe only conference season, but still some tough decisions ahead for Huskies hockey and all of college sports. So we'll keep an eye on how that story develops. Moving into the NHL, Monday, Noah, was a pretty big day for the Minnesota Wild and some other NHL teams as the draft lottery phase 2 was completed, and it was a chance to get the number 1 overall pick. And it wasn't the Minnesota Wild. I know you're hopeful. I know you felt good, but it was the New York Rangers that end up getting the first overall pick and likely picking the consensus number 1 rated skater in this 2020 class, and Alexis Lafreniere.
Yeah, I don't know. The Minnesota Wild, you could see the little ping pong ball at the bottom, just kind of chilling, just kind of mingling, middle of the pack. Isn't that so prototypical of Minnesota Wild hockey? I'm glad the Toronto Maple Leafs didn't get it, or a team like Edmonton. Toronto definitely had their chances. A couple shots off the post, as one would say. But you know what? The New York Rangers haven't picked first since 1965. So I mean, I'm not mad by any means, but would have liked to have seen, maybe a team like Minnesota or Florida snag that. Of course, Minnesota's never picked first in the NHL draft. The last Minnesota team in the NHL to pick first was the last postseason team to pick first in the Minnesota North Stars in 1983. So, the Rangers, I think the only thing that stings about New York is right now they're becoming a dangerous team. They need some goaltending help, but they're becoming a dangerous team, and they did pick second overall last year. So I think that's the only reason I feel a little bit bitter about it, but it certainly could have been much worse. And, whoever the New York Rangers pick, we don't know for sure. Of course, the draft isn't slated to start until I believe the first or second week of October, Nick. So we'll have to wait.
October 9th. October 9th is the first round of the entry draft, at least as this year's concerned. I never thought closer to, my older birthdays, you could say, that I would be talking about an NHL draft. But definitely we'll have to follow, see what the New York Rangers do. But wouldn't surprise me if, again, Alexis Lafreniere is taken by the Rangers first overall, who were swept out of the qualifying round by the Carolina Hurricanes. Speaking of some of that qualifying, now officially the quarterfinals, Noah, I think it's time to do a little bit of a recap on the current status of some of those series that are happening. I think starting in the Western Conference, give our listeners a little bit of a breakdown of what's happening up in Edmonton and Toronto.
Yeah, we'll dive in. Of course, we're recording this Saturday at about 5 o'clock. So kind of keep in mind if you're listening a couple days later and you're like, you guys are not correct in what you're talking about. Well, we never are. But, that just gives you more and more context as to as to where we're at here, Nick. But
especially coming out of your mouth, it's never right. So
absolutely. So we're going to jump in. The game slated tonight in the Western Conference is the Vegas Golden Knights against Chicago. Vegas at this current point in time leads 2-0. Chicago needs this game badly. There's no doubt about that one. No surprise, I think that Vegas is kind of walking over the Blackhawks a little bit, but keep an interest in that one. In the next series, Calgary leads 2-1 over Dallas. Nick, this is kind of an interesting series where it's a wide open series, but not in the way that you would expect. I think these are two teams that obviously you wouldn't expect to really match up against each other, but they're kind of proving to really have a good kind of clash of the clans, as one would say.
They play wide open, and neither team really has, at least some dynamic scoring. So they're both, not the most high-scoring team. So both of them have been playing a very physical brand of hockey, too. Again, it's the playoffs that always gets ramped up to a different notch, but no question, Calgary was out without Matthew Tkachuk for game number 3. He suffered an injury in game 2. Actually went to the tunnel and back a couple different times before he exited the game, I believe, late in the second period. So a huge physical presence, but also some offensive presence that you're losing for Matthew Tkachuk. So it's been an interesting series to watch. It's a pretty closely matched, and again, it'll be fun to watch that series play out. I think it's going to be one that certainly can go 6 or 7 games.
Yeah, one that maybe we expected to go 6 or 7 games, but it doesn't really have the makings right now. Vancouver's leading 2-0 over the defending champions, the St. Louis Blues. I definitely don't think St. Louis is out of this race by any means. I think that they were maybe, I don't want to say stunned, but when you're coming from the round that you weren't scratching and clawing your way to try to get into the playoffs like Vancouver was against Minnesota, I think maybe they were on their heels a little bit in the first game, maybe not so much in the second game, but they certainly don't seem like the team in control that we saw last year. They really needed that overtime game against Vancouver on Friday night. But nonetheless, the Canucks, or their young group right now, has found the right groove at the right time. As a Wild fan, I don't know how I feel about that, but best luck to the Canucks, and if they can make a deep playoff run much earlier than anticipated for their franchise, I think it would be a welcome addition to the Northwest neighbor.
100%. And, speaking of St. Louis, it's been their defense, honestly. That's what carried them through the playoffs last year. Jordan Binnington is not the same. He doesn't have the same numbers, I should say, as he had last year. He's not really trying to carry the team. He had a couple of softies going in the last couple of games. So St. Louis, if they can find a way to tighten down defensively, we know that they're a team that plays well with a lead, and that's one thing they haven't had in this series. So if St. Louis can get a lead and finally force the Canucks to start chasing the game instead of leading it, St. Louis can certainly crawl back in the series.
Definitely agree 100%, Nick. The last series in the Western Conference that I feel like has really got the most firepower in terms of you just don't know what's going to happen. Colorado leads Arizona 2-1 right now. Of course, they play tonight on Saturday as well. Or they already played today, I should say. Arizona picked up a key 1-goal win against Colorado earlier today. So that series has been tight. It's been physical. It's been gritty. And this Arizona group, for punching their ticket to the playoffs for the first time in a long time, they've really proved their mettle against Nashville, who was, not an easy opponent. And then Colorado, arguably a team that has a chance to win a Stanley Cup either this year or in the coming years. Arizona's taking them pound for pound in this one, Nick. So I don't know how this one's going to go, but I don't know if I expected it to go to 6 or 7 games, but it certainly has the makings of it so far.
Again, you mentioned close games. I think that's what Arizona has to do, is they have to try to shut down, the big guns of Colorado, which is not an easy task. Nathan McKinnon, Gabriel Landeskog, again, Nate McKinnon. And then on the back end, you got Cale Makar, who's just, lightning on his feet. This team is so fast up and down their lineup, and they're getting good goaltending from Grubauer. One thing that they probably were missing the last couple of playoff runs. And so they've got a complete balanced team going into it. In Arizona, as you mentioned, I think they're realizing and starting to believe almost that they can compete with these top tier clubs. And certainly, again, down 2-0 in the series, giving up that win today, making it 2-1, it's a whole different ball game now. So maybe Arizona just needs a little bit of confidence, and today's win should provide that. And have to see what Game 4 brings you in the next couple of days.
Darcy Kemper's been playing well for Arizona as well, former Minnesota Wild player. Of course, like you mentioned, he matches up against Philip Grubauer. As we move to the Eastern Conference, Philip Grubauer's old team, the Washington Capitals, not faring so well against their old bench boss in Barry Trotz and the New York Islanders. 2-0. The Isles do lead in that series pretty handily as well, too. They've been shadowing Alex Ovechkin pretty heavily in that series from what I gather, Nick. And I don't know, the New York Islanders have really developed a reputation in the past couple of years of just being a stingy defensive hockey team that kind of took the Minnesota Wild's formula, but like learned how to win hockey games with it. The Isles slowly and surely trying to punch their ticket to the next round.
Certainly, as you mentioned, just a very good defensive team. And again, of course, Barry Trotz, who won the Stanley Cup with the Washington Capitals a couple of years ago. There's some inside knowledge and maybe some tendencies, some of those players on the current roster of the Capitals. So certainly is probably helping them as well. And as you know, Barry Trotz just preaches defense first. They're clogging up the middle. They're making it very, very tough to get to the neutral zone. And as you mentioned, they're really taking a stab at some of their top point getters in Alex Ovechkin, Nick Backstrom, as well as Evgeny Kuznetsov and TJ Oshie. So very, very tough for them to generate any offense. And remember game one, Washington was up 2-0. It was Islanders that came storming back to win game one. So Islanders just certainly not letting them go away. They're hanging tough in this series and ran away by 2-0 lead. And again, game three going to be very important for the series to see if Washington can crawl back in it.
Yeah, game three in another series is going to be really pivotal too, as Montreal and Philadelphia are tied 1-1 entering their game three. And Montreal kind of with a just absolute domination of a game, a 5-0 win against Philadelphia, chasing Carter Hart, the rookie goaltender out of Philadelphia. I don't know, is it really that surprising anymore, Nick, that Montreal, is starting to find their groove? I mean, they're a team that came together quickly. They're playing with no expectations because they've already exceeded expectations by getting through the round against Pittsburgh. I feel like if Montreal stays pat, I don't think Philly's going to go away quietly by any means. I think Philadelphia's a dark horse candidate. But Nick, you've gotten a chance to check out a couple of these games. What are your impressions of this series so far?
I think Philly took the foot off the gas a little bit. There's no question that on paper, Philadelphia should be just taking Montreal to the cleaners without a question. Also, Montreal playing a little bit with some emotion too. Claude Julien, again, exiting the bubble with what we knew to be chest pains at the time. It was a stent that was inserted into a coronary artery. He is recovering, I believe, back home. So certainly some thoughts go out to head coach of the Montreal Canadiens. So I think the team was trying to play for the coach there in game number two. But no question, Philadelphia. You look at Carter Hart in that game, you really can't fault him for a lot of those goals. Carey Price playing his lights out. We knew that he's going to be the key to any playoff success with the Montreal Canadiens. But you mentioned you get one game under your belt, you start feeling good, maybe good things will happen. But I think you're going to be see in game number three, going to see quite the rebound by this squad. And I think Philly will eventually take care of the series pretty quickly against Montreal.
Yeah, you're kind of starting to see a theme a little bit between, Montreal, the New York Islanders, where defense is really starting to prevail, especially in this bubble restart with teams not having played in 3.5 months. And a defensive team in the Columbus Blue Jackets against a high-powered, high-octane offense against the Tampa Bay Lightning. That series, of course, is currently tied 1-1. They play later tonight. But Nick, I feel like they played about 8 games already. I feel like the series is probably over, setting the record, I believe the 4th longest NHL playoff game in history. 5 overtimes, game winner Braden Point in game 1. In game 2, Columbus took that one. No slouch of a hockey contest as well. I mean, what more can you say about this exciting series so far?
It's been one hell of a series, honestly. You talk about, teams were built very differently. Again, Tampa Bay built with some very high-scoring athletes, Nikita Kucherov, again, Steven Stamkos, who hasn't been in the lineup. You've got Alex Killorn that's contributing. Again, you mentioned Braden Point. And again, in the back end, anchored by Victor Hedman. I mean, this group can almost score at will. But then you get the tenacity of John Tortorella, especially to the middle of the ice as well, the defensive zone. This team blocks shots. They get in shooting and passing lanes. They're just a very, very good team. And they never quit. They're a very puck-hungry team. They love to skate, and they just like making your life a living, an H-double hockey stick. So it's a very evenly matched series, Noah. And it's a series about patience if you're Tampa Bay, where it's very easy, especially when you can score at will like Tampa Bay can do. You have to be able to relax. You have to know that you're going to have to take care of some of those chances that you get. You're not going to get all these open looks, but you can't get frustrated too. The one thing that I think Tampa caught themselves last year was that when they weren't getting back in the series, they got frustrated. You saw Nikita Kucherov take a pretty bad penalty, end up being suspended for a game. You have to keep your emotions in check against a team like John Tortorella's. You'll get your chances. There won't be many, but again, you have to just stick with the game plan and continue to grind on away. And again, Tampa should be favored in the series, but game 3, man, I'm watching that tonight. It's going to be one hell of a hockey game.
Yeah, and the other game today as well, speaking of sticking to the game plan, the Boston Bruins had a shakeup that we're going to get into, of course, with Yaroslav Halak entering the game today, and the Bruins did get the win, a 3-1 victory over the Carolina Hurricanes. They're up 2-1 in the series. This is a series as well, too, where, man, I just feel like that Carolina team, they're a deadly hockey team when they find a way to get rolling. Of course, they're going up against the big bad Bruins, the Boston Bruins, taking a Game 7 against the St. Louis Blues in last year's Stanley Cup final. They're a team that's been there, that's done that, looking to get over the hump once again. I don't know. I feel like Boston, with this shakeup in Yaroslav Halak, played a very emotional game, like you kind of mentioned, alluded to earlier in the Montreal series as well. They played a very emotional game 3, got the job done, got the benefit of a bounce with a goal / maybe no goal against Yaroslav Halak covering that puck along the goal line. But yeah, I don't know. I see this series going the full length as well, because I think Carolina can really take this Bruins team pound for pound.
They really can, and Carolina is going to be without one of their best point getters on Andrei Svechnikov for a little bit, as he was injured on a play with Zdeno Chara again. And you talk about, Rod Brind'Amour and, the passion that he has to coach. I mean, these players love playing for him. He's amazing what he's done. Part of the turnaround of that roster. And I think, again, you talk about Sebastian Aho and a couple other big forwards, and the defensively heavy team back there led by Jacob Slavin. That team, again, can really hang with Boston. But again, without David Pastrnak in the lineup for Boston, if he's in the lineup, I don't think we're talking that this series is as close. So there's certainly some firepower missing. But right now, Carolina is certainly no slouch of a hockey team, and they're taking it every chance that they get to try to keep this as even as possible.
Did you see that video? I think it surfaced on Twitter, and the Carolina Hurricanes, their media group, their social media group, I should say, does a fantastic job of running, their fan engagement. Did you see it? I think it's Jordan Martinook. His pregame ritual is yelling at Andrei Svechnikov before every game. And first of all, if you haven't got a chance to check it out, go see if you can find it. I think it was Tim and Sid that was the first ones to tweet that one out. And I had one of my friends that were like, did you see this video? Why is this guy, minutes before game time yelling at one of his teammates and doing all this weird stuff? Well, it's just getting the guys relaxed, right? Especially in NHL playoff games, you have guys that are, they're tense, they're kind of just dialed in a little bit, and it helps you relax, and it helps you just kind of play the right way instead of gripping your stick too tight, and not making the plays that you would normally make. So, I'm sure you got a chance to check it out, but to me, that was freaking hilarious.
It is pretty funny. For a pregame ritual for me, I always, with another player that we did shoulder checks. We checked each other into the boards, and it was just a way to try to get the butterflies out. It's like that first hit in football almost. It's like when you line up to the line, there's nerves, and there's definitely some mixed feelings as you're at the line of scrimmage, and finally when you get that first hit, you gotta get into the game. And for them, you're doing that before you get on the ice, and so it's a pretty common ritual. I don't know about the yelling part, but certainly and trying to skate off and just try to get yourself warmed up, and as you mentioned, just trying to get your mental preparedness ready, because again, in one mistake here there could cost you a game, it could cost you a series and a chance to lift Lord Stanley's Cup. So interesting, no question by Jordan Martinook, but if it helps Svechnikov, it helps him, then if it works, stay with it.
Yeah, and it's going to be an interesting matchup, like you mentioned. They're dealing with the injury bug a little bit. And on the other side, their opponent, the Boston Bruins, not really dealing with so much an injury bug, but personal reasons, as Tuukka Rask has elected to leave the bubble and go back home with family. Nick, from the impressions that I got here, I know there's a lot of people, especially on social media, on Twitter, they're talking about how, the timing is really weird, that Tuukka Rask bailed on his team. He said that he wasn't maybe fully engaged, because there wasn't a crowd and that sort of thing, and maybe his teammates razzed him for it. Someone said his teammates razzed him for it, so he went home. Guys, this is professional hockey. He didn't go home because his teammates razzed him for it, I promise you. From the impression that I got, with everything that 2020 and COVID has brought us, he's got a newborn child on the way. He's got 2 young kids as well. You only get that moment, I suppose however many times you happen to have children, but you don't get that moment very often in this world. And I think for Tuukka Rask, especially maybe if he wasn't feeling like he was at his best or that engaged, I got to honestly commend him a little bit for, recognizing, one, if he has, family issues, maybe he does have someone in his family that happened to be ill or that sort of thing, or if he just wasn't feeling engaged, he does owe it to his team to be honest with him about that. And, GM Don Sweeney said, we're not surprised by this announcement at all. So it kind of makes me feel like Yaroslav Halak is getting the call, and Tuukka Rask just has some other things that are preoccupying his mind, and he needs to go take care of them. And for me, I see no issue with that, especially in the first round. If it's the Stanley Cup final, game 4, yeah, a little bit different. But you know what? He was honest enough about it, and the Bruins have played whatever it's been, 5 or 6 games to this point. I don't think it's that odd, and shouldn't be that odd to many people, because family is more important than the game of hockey.
Well, first of all, those poor New England sports fans who haven't had a championship in 150 years, again, you always forget that athletes are human beings and they have families. And I've never understood the notion where a professional athlete owes something to the fans, really, because this isn't about the team. This isn't about, Tuukka Rask and his career numbers. This isn't about him at all. This is about my team is in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I want my team the best chance to succeed because I want to see them win. There's no question that if you ask Tuukka Rask as a man-to-man that he wants to win the Stanley Cup. There's no question about that. However, as you mentioned with COVID, we're dealing with circumstances nobody ever would have thought we would be dealing with. And to try to, I guess, meet in the middle, if you even want to call it that, we're playing inside of a bubble. Their families are not even allowed in. And in his specific situation, again, you mentioned young kids at home, young ones on the way. And, from your comment there, GM Don Sweeney says they weren't surprised. That almost tells me that there was a conversation, maybe perhaps, either beforehand or maybe during, that said, I'm not sure about this. Maybe he was already kind of in between about participating, and it just maybe finally caught up to him. And again, can you imagine being in his shoes, understanding and coming to the realization that I don't think I should be here right now? I mean, to his teammates, to a man, that's not an easy position to be in. But I do think you're right, Noah. You have to give him some credit where you do kind of rise up. You admit, hey, you know what? I thought I could do this. Maybe, again, I'm speculating, and maybe no, I can't. I feel like I need to be at home. My wife is going to be delivering our next kid, and I need to be there to support her. And, I love my teammates. I love the game of hockey. I want to win a Stanley Cup, but right now there are things that's more important than that. And I got to leave the bubble. So again, I have no issue with that. In fact, I have an issue with the fans who do take issue with this. That's just my take on it. And I think he has every right as an athlete to be with his family, especially during the times, as you mentioned, that you just can't get back. You can't get back the birth of a child. You can't get back time spent with family. And again, is there maybe some more stuff happening behind the scenes? We don't know. It's possible, but he deserves every right to be with his family when he feels like he needs to be.
Yeah, life happens, right? That's just how it is. He may have gotten to the bubble and everything was totally kosher, and now everything's been flipped on its head. That just is what it is. And I think to really go back to Tuukka Rask, this being, a very difficult decision for him and a very honest decision for him. I believe he's a Vezina Trophy candidate this year, if I'm not mistaken. He was having a Vezina type season, and you don't just walk away from that. You know what I mean? And oddly enough, the last real citation of a goaltender really having to leave for those personal family reasons actually resides with the Boston Bruins. Former Cup winner Tim Thomas, who was the starter while Tuukka Rask was the backup in 2011 when they won in Game 7 over the Vancouver Canucks. He kind of left the game a little bit for family reasons as well. And, there were commercials made about Tim Thomas, and you remember the old commercial of Tim Thomas where the cab driver is, she's like blowing a kiss to the picture of Tim Thomas and he's in the back kind of like, oh my goodness, this is really creepy. But that shows, how much Tim Thomas gave of himself. And nobody really got on Thomas about that. I think it's more the timing. I think people are just frustrated because it's the playoffs and it's like, well, you're here. Why didn't you do this? Man, life doesn't wait for sporting events. Life doesn't wait for the playoffs. Life doesn't wait for multi-million-dollar contracts. Life is life, and it goes on, and it affects us with highs and lows, however it may be. And unfortunately for Tuukka Rask right now, he might be in a really tough place, or in a place where he just feels that he needs to take care of business. And like you mentioned, screw the people that really honestly think that he bailed on his team in a selfish way. Did he bail on his team? I suppose, I guess, if you want to go there. But he was honest about what was going on. I'm sure there was internal discussions with the team, and he's doing what he feels is right to a man. And I don't think anyone can fault a person for doing that. That's just my opinion. I feel like you agree with me there, but I don't know, Nick. I wish him all the best, and hopefully he's able to resolve everything. Who knows? He might be able to quarantine and come back in the bubble. I have no idea how that works. Like, if you leave the bubble, are you gone forever? I have no idea.
I believe so, unless, you would do a quarantine period and, some other kind of steps. But, you get the impression if you're leaving for this reason that you probably aren't coming back. I wouldn't expect him back. So with Tuukka, I guess you mentioned you hope that everything is the best, and, definitely support him in making a very tough decision, from just an athlete and a person standpoint, between the game that you love and your job, essentially, to being with family. Again, not an easy position to be in. And again, it's very easy for all of us to play, sort of Monday morning quarterback, but here we are. He's made his decision. I think it's best to support him in those endeavors. I have to wish Tuukka Rask all the best. But another player who gave himself for his team pre-Division I era, our healthy scratch interview for this week is going to be Dave Reichel. He joins us. You know him as the analyst 96.7 The River alongside Jim Erickson. So without further ado, let's bring on Dave Reichel.
With a new guest joining every week, it's a lineup chock full of players, coaches, fans, and more. This week's special guest is the Healthy Scratch.
And joining us this week on the Healthy Scratch interview segment is 1991 St. Cloud State Athletics Hall of Fame and former men's hockey player Dave Reichel, current radio analyst. Dave, how you doing this morning? Thanks again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. Yep.
So, Dave, just to get us started out, why don't you talk about your hockey career here at St. Cloud, and was kind of your journey to getting to becoming a Husky?
Sure. My dad played there in the 50s, so we have a lot of pride in the program going way back. And so at one point I said, Dad, I'm not going where you went, but I actually did, and it was a great choice. My dad, he said it was his best move ever. He transferred from the University of Minnesota, and so he was in the 50s when they were outdoor rink out by Shoemaker Hall. The rink was right between Shoemaker Hall and Eastman Hall, right there where Brown Hall in that area. As I got a picture in the background of him in 54 with Shoemaker Hall in the background. So pretty cool. But that influence, my dad went on to be a head coach at Benil, then was a teacher for 40 years. St. Cloud has been known as a great teaching school for years and years and years. And so, and my brother went there also, or brothers. And so I came in the 70s and really enjoyed Coach Bash. Bash was my coach back then.
Yeah, 138 points in your time there, actually third all time in the pre-Division I era behind Mike Brodzinski and John Burgo. You actually hold the record for most assists in a season and career, and then your father, Jerry, actually is tied for the most goals in a game. You guys just kind of seem to have a knack of, being performers at that level. Was there ever... did you ever expect yourself to be one of the all-time scoring leaders in St. Cloud, or did you just, try to be the best player you could be on any given night?
Yep, you nailed it right there, Noah. Yeah, you just try and be the best player you can. I started at a very young age. Again, my dad was head hockey coach at Benilde, so there was a lot of influence there. And so he didn't have to push at all. I mean, we were on the ponds and outdoor rinks constantly, day and night. And that's how you get to be good, is by doing that, not just your regular practice times, but all the extra stuff off the ice in the driveway, on ponds, that's how you get to be a good player.
Dave, you mentioned obviously playing outside, the pond hockey and obviously development of the game. But, can you describe a little bit about your play style and I guess why you were able to find the back of the net and put up the points that you did night in and night out for St. Cloud State?
Yeah, everybody has a different style. It's what you're given and what you go with. And so I just enjoy setting people up. Scoring goals, it was awesome all the time. But you just go with your strengths. Some people are grinders down low. Some people are better in front of the net. Some people are better playing defense. I enjoyed playing up the middle, playing as a centerman, where you're in touch with the whole game. You play defense and offense, and there's more skating involved in playing center, so I enjoyed that a lot.
You know, you actually kind of capped off your performance as a Husky. I mean, you're a two-time All-American, but, you know, a 6-point game in 1977-78 versus Iowa State. Is there a game or a particular series or set of moments as a player that's really stood out to you as kind of being, you know, that game to remember or series to remember as a player for the Huskies?
Not any one particular game or series, but the rivalries were the big thing that, like, for example, St. John's, Mankato State was our big rival back then. And so all the games, St. Cloud, even today, St. Cloud State versus Mankato State, now it's MSU Mankato, but those were tough games. MSU Mankato, always a top program. St. Cloud State, very, very good also. And so those big rivalry games, those are the ones that you really look forward to, and I really enjoyed those a lot.
Dave, how much influence did your dad as being a coach have an impact on you? I mean, I can imagine that you learned quite a bit from him, and maybe just watching him. How was he as an impact for you as a player?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a tremendous impact there. And as the head coach at Benilde, I was in the locker room. So you can imagine a young little kid, let's say 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old in the locker room with all these giants, and they were in high school, and that influence. And my dad always, he had the right idea. He was never pushing. He was always supporting. If they were in the stands, they were cheering, and they were just supporting, not this, you know, blaming the refs, blaming the coaches, blaming this. They just were supportive. And if, you know, basically if you want to be a good player, David, you would get out there and you'd practice and work at it. And so from my mom and dad and brothers, I'm the oldest of 4 boys, tremendous family support. And so I believe that's the right thing to do, is if someone has a passion, that you support that. And we certainly as a family have a passion for hockey.
You mentioned Charlie Bash, who played for, you know, longtime coach there at St. Cloud. You guys really didn't have probably the records that you were hoping for, kind of middle of the pack, you know, in terms of wins and losses. Can you kind of talk about what his influence was like, what it was like playing for him? And have you seen, like, what are some coaches that really stand out to you that you've been around in the St. Cloud State Husky hockey eras?
Well, there's been so many coaches there, but Coach Bash, he was there for 16 years, from 68 to 84, before John Perpich and Craig Dahl and all of that. So Charlie, great job, 16 years, more of a laid-back coach, you know, not this tyrant, you know, just driving you crazy, but more of a supportive coach. And he wasn't really a big hockey player back in his day, but he was a teacher and coach for a long time. Even to this day, Charlie Bash and I have a great relationship, and he's over in the St. Ben's nursing home here in St. Cloud, doing okay. He had a stroke a few years ago, and he's in his mid-90s now, and overall doing okay. But with COVID, it's challenging times for Coach Bash, and he did a tremendous job those 16 years that he was there.
Yeah, you guys kind of set the precedent for Huskies hockey a little bit. Their best year was in 86-87, right before the transition to Division I hockey. And then, of course, you got started in broadcasting in 1990. Do you take a little bit of pride in kind of helping grow that program to where it is now? And can you kind of talk about what you were up to in that time when you stopped playing and then before you started broadcasting?
Yeah, I do take a lot of pride in the whole program. It goes back to 1931. When your dad plays there back, you know, that was 70 years ago my dad played there. So, I mean, there is a deep love and pride in the program. I love to see how it's going. A lot of times the younger players or current people around don't realize that all these different eras through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, there's a lot to it. Like, for example, the 50s, they kept the program alive. My dad told me they had to just work and just scratch and claw to keep the program going and keep it alive. And so really there's no one era that's better than the other or more important. It's just a combination of all these eras. You go back in time, St. Cloud was the team going back years ago. And people were coming from all over. You know, you got Frank Brimsick in the Hockey Hall of Fame coming early here to St. Cloud State. So this program is not just now. I mean, it goes way, way back. And so, yes, we have tremendous pride in the program. And Coach Larson right now, the program's in great hands with Coach Larson right now.
Dave, I mentioned briefly, member of the 1991 St. Cloud State Athletic Hall of Fame. I guess what kind of pride do you take as far as, you play as a student athlete, you put up the numbers that you did, but, is there just something different about having your name called and being recognized on the university level like you did in 91?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Nick. The pride factor too. So St. Cloud State University's been around 150 years, and the Athletic Hall of Fame, that how many very good athletes have come through the program, the school, and all sports. And what's unique is in 91, my dad and I both were inducted the same year. And to this day, at 150 years, there's one father and son in the Athletic Hall of Fame at St. Cloud State University. It's my dad and I. So am I proud about that? Absolutely. My dad has passed away now. And I mean, when, it's an emotional deal because he was a Husky through and through, not a Gopher. He was all Husky. And so being inducted in 91 with him was a really neat family thing, not just my dad and I, but a family thing. And so that pride continues in the program. My brother Mark played for the Huskies also, and I had another brother go to St. Cloud State. My mom and dad met at St. Cloud. My mom was a nurse there, and so it's much deeper than hockey also. Thanks, Nick.
To get back to the game too, you got into broadcasting, I believe it was in 1990, and you've been...
That's correct, yep.
For almost 30 years. How did that opportunity just kind of come about, and what kind of, did you know that you were going to do it from the get-go, or did you kind of have to think about, going on the air for the first time?
You guys are coming up with great questions. Nice. So in 1989, I flipped on a broadcast, and so what happened, I was just tuning in. Greg Harrington was broadcasting the Huskies 1989, and he's doing the game alone in 1989. I thought, this is crazy. He's got to go 3.5 hours alone, and that is just to keep talking alone for 3.5 hours. So in 1989, I called WJON Studios. The sports manager's name's John Schroeder over there, and just said, hey, you got to have a color analyst, a color man, and can I audition? He said, sure, we'll do an audition right away. Went and auditioned, did a high school game with John Schroeder, and boom, got hired right away. So 30 years later, still going strong, covering Husky hockey. It's pretty fun.
Dave, as much as you learned the game of hockey when you're younger, as a broadcaster, I imagine there's things you had to learn along the way. Is there any one thing in particular you've had to learn in your use of broadcast, and any one person that's had a big influence on your broadcasting career?
I don't know if anyone, maybe Al Shaver. As a kid, we always enjoyed broadcasting. But one thing as a broadcaster, and you can do this, is a lot of interviews, you really have to listen to who you're interviewing. And instead of just all these pre-planned questions, you have to really listen and try and feed off of who you're interviewing, and you can go that direction. That's ideal if you can follow the direction of the person you're talking to. But at the same time, while you're listening to that person you're interviewing, you also have to, in the back of your mind, be ready to ask another question, because some people, their answers are very short, as you know, and so you have to really be on your toes to be a good listener and be prepared. So it's a challenge, but with experience, it gets easier and easier and easier. But that was an interesting thing to learn, that art of being able to listen and think at the same. I mean, it's not as easy as it sounds. It's quite challenging.
I can definitely empathize with that. I know that if I ever have my wheels turning and I need to buy myself a few time, I just ask Brett Larson about a player, because he's going to give me about a 5-second answer before he
yeah
on to the next.
Speaking of like a 5, I've interviewed, a zillion players and coaches and, big time scouts, and going all, Herb Brooks to just about everybody. And the one interview, and I've done a ton of them, like Al Shaver was an awesome interview, Glenn Sonmore. So to your point, sort of what I would do between intermission, this was just one game at Mariucci Arena years ago. So I sat down with Glenn and basically asked him one question, and then about 12 minutes later, the interview was over, because you didn't even have to, he would just meander for 12 minutes straight with one question, where other guys, and you guys would appreciate this, you got to keep asking tons of questions. So I just put my feet up, crossed my legs, and listened to Glenn Sonmore for about 12 minutes, straight minutes. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think that especially players, you see players get a little more nervous about it too, and it's kind of like,
especially freshmen. Yes.
It's like we're nervous too. Don't worry, we're the ones who has to put this all together. But speaking of players, in your time both as a player and as a broadcaster, are there a couple of guys or a certain team that really stands out to you as kind of being this elite tier, kind of just one step above some of the other teams or players at St. Cloud State?
Well, the best team ever, there are so many ways we can go with this, but 2 years ago, that team, that was the unbeatable team led by Jimmy Schultz. That you could not ask for a better team. That year they went into Boston College, let's say the Notre Dame of football, and they just beat them 7-0 at BC. And so that team was a special team. They were unbeatable, undefeated at home. You couldn't beat them, and yet in athletics, you never know. And then American International College beat them. The ice was not good that afternoon, and everything American International played an awesome game. St. Cloud just couldn't get their wheels going, and with that bouncing puck, but a tremendous. That's as good. They had no weaknesses on that team. It just shows you in sports, even though they were unbeatable, they got beat.
Dave, as a player, you talk about, just some sports are just crazy sometimes, right? You get puck luck here and there. You have things that just kind of go the wrong way or the right way, one way or another. But either as a broadcaster or a player, is there any one specific hockey story that sticks out to you, whether you're playing or broadcasting, that, just something that you just never forget, just the most memorable moment?
Okay, great one. Now, in 30 years of broadcasting, we could talk for hours about stories. It's unbelievable over the years what you have. But I'll just throw one that just popped into mind right away. So this was Gino Parrish back, let's say it's 20 years ago. I'm not sure what year Gino, but we're doing the senior night's a very emotional night for these seniors. And so he's coming out from behind the bench, Gino Parrish. He has a rainbow wig stashed behind the bench in the hallway. They call his name Gino. What does he do? He flashes, puts on the big rainbow wig, and goes out, skates out on the center ice with his rainbow wig on. Only Gino Parrish could be pulling that off, and it was classic. Gino Parrish. That's just one. We could talk. I have hundreds of stories of different players and coaches and happenings that are really unique, but that's one that just popped in my head right away.
Is there, I guess maybe to keep that train rolling, is there one, another story either from your playing days at broadcasting, a coach that was fun to work with, a coach that wasn't so fun to work with? I've certainly been on the end of questions that have gone wrong, just things like that. There's just so many, it's just hard, Noah, to just pick on one. If you were to ask me like one player, I could just, go, because every player was just so unique. Maybe the most gifted scorer we ever had was Mark Hartigan, and what he did for St. Cloud State is his scoring abilities. And one game, I believe he had 4 goals against Alaska Anchorage, but he was a sniper, a great player. Long time ago, but nothing in particular just popping. Even though I have just tons of stories, I don't have anything just sitting on my tongue right now. There, on that note, guys that kind of fly under the radar but have really good NHL careers. One guy in particular, Matt Cullen, who just played the game the right way. Can you kind of talk about him a little bit and what he was like as a Husky? Because I know we've had other guests on and they've talked about like his numbers are not eye-popping numbers, but he played whatever it was, 21 seasons in the National Hockey League.
Well, that was there from the beginning. So Matt came here in 1995. He was a tremendous player. The thing that separated him was his tremendous passion, focus, and he was prepared. A lot of players are up and down every game at all levels. Matt Cullen's preparation, intensity, he showed up every single game. He had an unbelievable passion for the game. Now, his stick skills were outstanding. So even as a college, he only played 2 years here, 95 to 97, but even as, let's say, like a sophomore here, his stick skills were top 10% NHL-wise. So passing, not necessarily shooting, he was not a big scorer at all, but his passing skills, his puck handling skills were elite. His drive and determination, his focus was just awesome. And he was a pleasure to have, even though we only had him for 2 years here. He came in that same era with Mark Parrish, but Matt Cullen, a very proud Husky back for those 2 years.
Dave, let's go to maybe current players. I know that this last roster had, some ups and downs. It certainly was a year of rebuilding, you could say. But is there one player that's on the current roster, as long as college hockey again plays this season, that sticks out to you that should be a big impact player, and why do you say this player should be a big impact for the St. Cloud State Huskies?
Well, they've got a bunch of impact players. They were just young last year. This year, they're going to be, hopefully they'll play. I mean, but they've got, anytime you're strong on defense, when you return 7, plus they brought in a Michigan Tech defenseman also, and then with David Rennick in the goal. Anytime you're strong back in the blue line, you're going to be in the game. St. Cloud State will score more this season. But as to your question, who are a few? Maybe, for example, Sam Henches. Okay, so this kid, the injury just slowed him down last year. Matt Hendricks, now retired in NHL, works with the Minnesota Wild in player development, and he went to a few games, and he'd be up in the press box. And so Matt and I would talk about Sam Henches, and Matt Cullen, Matt Hendricks knows his stuff, and he's very high on Sam Henches. So Sam could absolutely have a breakout. Micah Miller could be a breakout. Big senior year for Kevin Fitzgerald. Of the younger players, it's probably led by Jami Kranila, probably from Finland, but I know there's a new Finn, Miettinen, coming in, but we never know about new players because the new players can be superstars wherever they were, but come here and have like 2 goals. So you just never know. Those are a few. Trable back in the blue line was absolutely outstanding. Lots of young players, but as the season went on, they got better and better and better. So if you're going to just say maybe one, and Johnny Brodzinski, Easton Brodzinski can score like crazy, leading goal scorer last year. But Sam Henches probably, also Nolan Walker too. But if I was going to point at one, I'd say maybe Sam Henches. He has a real upside, a real strong potential to be a great college player and potentially move on to the NHL too.
Yeah, he's kind of got a gear that nobody else really seems to get to, and could be a real steal as a late round pick for the Minnesota Wild.
Right, and it just slowed him down. That injury really slowed him down big time. And so, if he can stay, he's got that explosive speed. And what's unique too about him, and Matt Hendricks and I were talking about it, is he's not afraid to go to the net. I mean, my gosh, he's not a huge guy, but that kid just goes for the net, puts his nose in there with that speed too. He's a fun player to watch.
He's a guy too. We talked in Duluth, like you mentioned, after that injury, he was a little bit snake bit. And I think once he starts scoring again, those floodgates are going to open. But on the back end, a guy who isn't so young and really doesn't want the floodgates to open is senior David Rennick, who is an LA Kings draft pick. Can you kind of talk about David Rennick and what he brings to this team, and potentially what you see in his future as an LA King?
Well, David Rennick's getting better and better. Now, 2 years ago, he had that elite defense right smack in front of him, but the LA Kings are very happy with David Rennick. This kid is an elite goaltender. He's one of the nicest guys, even as a freshman coming in. So I get to be in the trenches after the games. This kid is just even keel, even with a big win or a tough loss. He's always been polite, smiling, kind, thankful. He says thank you more than any other player I've ever interviewed by far. And so has he been improving? Absolutely, yes. And you can look, if the season happens, David Rennick could be the anchor on the, you had mentioned that, Noah. And going back, let's say it was maybe 15 years ago, I'm not positive, but there was a player, Joe Motzko, went on to win a Stanley Cup or two with the Anaheim Lady Ducks or Anaheim Ducks, and played here, great player, and he was in a scoring. So all players run into scoring slumps. That's just part of the game. And so what Joe Motzko did before one game is he got a piece of duct tape out or a piece of tape, and he got some Tylenol. And he taped some Tylenol to the shaft down by the blade, the shaft blade of the stick. A piece of a Tylenol next to it to get out of his scoring slump, and it did eventually work.
I guess the stick had a little bit of a cold there. Just needed to give it a little bit of medicine,
yes,
right?
it did. Hey, there's some these players that you get in their heads, and it's funny what they come up with, but the Tylenol worked for Joe Motzko back a long
Dave,
time
you
ago.
talked about defense earlier. I want to talk about Nick Perbix on the blue line, who really, as the second half of the season roll on last year, really emerged to me as more of a two-way player. We knew that he had some potential to be more on the offensive side, but he really started to emerge as a guy who wasn't afraid to carry the puck from his end all the way in and really started to kind of pinch and be more comfortable with providing some offense. But talk about his offensive side of the game, but more importantly, just how good he is on the defensive side of the game. He's a player that's really emerged.
You're exactly right on that, Nick. He has come on big time, and when he's dialed in and when he's focused, he is one tough kid to handle that reach. How would you like to defend against that guy with that reach and his stick handling skills? When he comes and shows up ready mentally and fired up, and as the season went on, he got better and better and better. So he has the potential also to move on to the big league when he finishes. And you're right, that kid, he was a force. He'll be a top 2 or 3 defenseman on this team, and we're lucky to still have him here.
You know, kind of transitioning a little bit to, you get to sit kind of up in the Eagles perch, so to speak, calling the games with current play-by-play announcer Jim Erickson. One, what's it like to work with Jim and kind of some of the other guys that you work with? And then 2, do you plan to do this long time? I mean, I know you've been doing it for 30 years, but do you plan on doing it as long as you possibly can, or is there an end goal in sight? Because I know Nick and I are looking for a job, so I guess
You want to knock me off? All right, okay. Well, basically what I do is I take it 1 year at a time. So I don't think 2 years, I don't think 3 years. I just think, because the business is so tough, it's a tough business behind the scenes. It's not like they just hand you this job. Like in my case, mid-August contracts come out, and it's just a 1 year contract every year, and you just never know. I mean, the business is tough. Radio and TV can get a little nasty, and so 1 year at a time, just take it. This year, I'm hoping to do it. COVID is really, who knows? As far as all the people I've been able to broadcast, it's been a pleasure all these years. Jim Erickson now, the last 4 or 5 years. Dan Terhar, both Minnesota Wild type guys. Dan Terhar from the Wild long time. Don Lyons, Tom Witchen, on and on. I mean, going way back 30 years. Greg Harrington back in the very, very beginning. Rick Benson, Dan Hammond. I mean, there's just so many really strong broadcasters. And as the color analyst, what I would do is sort of mesh with their style. Instead of them having to work with me, I would sort of blend to what worked for them. And it just worked out easier. It works easier that way. Being a play-by-play guy in hockey is extremely difficult. That is one of the toughest jobs you could ever have. And Jim Erickson does a tremendous job, and we're fortunate to have him before the NHL steals him, I'll tell you that.
It's kind of funny, actually. Nick and I actually met at a hockey game during the Northeastern series, calling a hockey game. It's the first time we ever met each other. And sorry to cut you off there, Nick. Actually, I'm not sorry at all. But
you never say sorry. What's going on here?
Hey, but is there a moment in broadcasting, especially maybe in your earlier days, where you kind of had maybe a technical issue or some sort of like mishap on your end where you're like, wow, that was nuts, and I hope that just never happens to me ever again?
Well, before we go on the air, this happens often, or I don't know about often, but it can be sort of a fire drill with technical things. There's always an engineer in the studio working that end, and there were many, many, many games where right up until you go on the air, you would never know that it was a fire drill behind the scenes. And it happens often. Major networks run into the same thing, and there's always can be technical difficulties no matter how prepared you are. Like Jim Erickson, he might show up 4 hours before the game and be working on technical stuff because he doesn't have an engineer on site. And so Jim is setting up all the equipment just like all the other broadcasters I've worked with. And behind the scenes, they put in so much time and effort, and then working with the studio engineer, and there's always a glitch here or there, and it is a tremendous art and talent to be a top play-by-play broadcaster, and Jim Erickson certainly is that.
Dave, broadcasting in a sense is almost like hockey, right? You can prepare all you want, you can have the scouting reports, but just some things sometimes they just happen, right? They just happen. And, as far as, just kind of going with the flow, is there any sort of similarities as being a player to being a broadcaster in terms of, whether it's my mic's not working and, you're really trying to get things ready before you go live on air, it's maybe 30 seconds before you go, but you just have to kind of roll with it. Are there any similarities from your playing days to maybe being ready to go on live on a broadcast?
Well, absolutely. Good question. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, preparation's everything. So I just don't pop in there and I'm ready to go. No, you prepare. And so you spend a lot of time scouting the other teams, tendencies around the country, your players. You just don't show up. It's the same thing as a player. You want to be good. See, the best players are the best prepared players. So if you talk to all the top players, they're the ones that are the best prepared. It's the same thing in broadcasting. You prepare, or in your job, your work, same thing. Preparation is everything. And so what happens if you're not prepared, then you get nervous because you're not sure what's going to go on, and it's tougher. So if there's one bit of advice I could give to you, it'd be just work like crazy, prepare, and because there's all kinds of glitches and things go wrong all the time, and the way you can work through those is by preparation and understand they're going to happen. So you just got to sort of roll with it.
Sitting up in the press box too as a broadcaster, and I know you had mentioned rivalries earlier as a player. Is there one particular team or series in particular in this current kind of generation of St. Cloud State hockey that you really look forward to that comes in the Herb Brooks building, or a place that you get to travel to occasionally?
Oh, great. I like that one. Okay. So I got stories that are endless, but North Dakota, St. Cloud, there was some bad blood. It's better now, but there's a tremendous rivalry. The games are the most intense. St. Cloud State, so behind the scenes, St. Cloud State, North Dakota, so down in the locker rooms, down in the training room, which series has the most ice bags out? It's always St. Cloud State, North Dakota. Okay, and it's so physical and so nasty down there. So just so you know, when those two teams meet, the ice bags are out. It is a man's game. And so when these young guys, like last year, they had a lot of young guys, and they go up to North Dakota, it's just like, whoa, okay. I mean, this is a whole different planet. You may think you're good, and that guy first hit puts you in the third row against North Dakota. So that's a series. Gophers, St. Cloud is always a great rivalry there. Those two. Duluth also. I really look forward to like St. Cloud State, Duluth, that rivalry, their beautiful building up there. Fun hockey games. They're always full. Duluth, North Dakota, Minnesota games, St. Cloud, always full. A lot of intensity. The atmosphere is awesome. There's been so many great games. And if you look at it over the last, let's say, 10 years, St. Cloud State has such a great record against those powerhouse teams. I mean, if you added up the wins and losses, you'd go, whoa, St. Cloud is really done well against those big three.
Dave, as a broadcaster, you end up meeting people and end up developing relationships that can last for quite a while. Is there anyone in your broadcast career, or maybe a few people that you've met and you still have relationships with them today that you carry on from the game of hockey?
All the people I've worked with have been great. There's a lot of pro scouts that come through, some big time NHL, like let's say a Herb Brooks or a Glenn Somm or an Al Shaver who spent. So like Herb Brooks, a little bit about him, he would always hide up in the press box, and we did once in a while would interview, but he wanted to sort of hide in the background, and he was a part of bringing up this Division I hockey. There were tons of other people that were bigger part of that puzzle than Herb Brooks was, but that name piece and Herb Brooks. So there's a lot of these, hockey is a small community at the top level when you look at people like that. And generally speaking, hockey people are really good. They're down to earth. They're not full of themselves. Their heads aren't just huge. You can have a regular conversation with hockey people instead of like, oh, why are you bothering me? They're more down to earth. So as you move forward in your career, hockey guys are, no matter who they are, you can have a very good conversation with them.
Only a couple more questions for you, Dave. And once again, thanks for joining us. Sure. In your transition to, from the Division III, Division II, and Division I eras at St. Cloud State, the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center has been a staple for a long time in the past, 2 decades or so. If you could update the Herb or make some changes to the Herb, what are some things that maybe stick out in your mind? Because it's a cool building, but we all know, of course, it is an aging building as well.
Yeah, so yes, it opened in December of 1989. It's one of the toughest buildings in the nation to play in. Absolutely, if you talk to visiting players, they love coming here and playing. It's loud, there's energy. These young kids with all their testosterone. They love that energy. And so it's really fun. As far as they made some really good improvements. The number one improvement I feel strongly is the sound system in the building would be number one. And so there are big plans to upgrade the whole sound system for everybody to be able to hear it better. You can be at center ice and not really be able to hear very well. So there's pockets where the sound is not good and it's too tinny. With some good work in the roof and with a good sound system and baffling up in the ceiling, they can really improve that sound system. And it would just make it more enjoyable for everybody. And then you could have bigger events in there too. You could have a graduation. And for example, like the sound system at Duluth is just awesome. You can put a wireless mic at center ice and you can hear every single word. And it makes such a big difference to be able to hear it clearly. And so I know behind the scenes they're working very, very hard on that issue and they're trying to make it better. So 30 years of that, that sound banging around in there, they are going to take care of that.
And then Dave, final question for you. Obviously the world today is incredibly different than we would normally be, say, a year ago with a normal off season. We're still waiting to hear if college hockey is indeed going to play, whether it's on time or delayed. But thinking to yourself as a player and now an analyst online, just how difficult do you think it is for a player to be in this scenario where things you might be playing might not? I guess, how would you as a player be looking forward to a season that may or may not happen? How difficult would it be?
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that question. Yeah. What the players will do and are doing is they can't control all this, the COVID and everything happening. So as a player and the coaches, they're controlling what they can control. So they're working out. They've started skating as a team. They've had their individual workouts. They are controlling what they can control. And that's what your top athletes are doing. So they're training in mind that they're going to play. And that's the way they have to approach it. That's the way the coaches, everybody involved in the program from the top down, you're going full speed ahead. Do they have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D? Yes, they do. But as a player specifically, you have to prepare like you're going full bore, and that's what they're doing.
And once again, Dave, sorry.
I have one last question, actually. And I know we've posited this to a couple of our guests. The NCHC came about, of course, from dissolving the old WCHA, and I know hockey revenue and attendance has been down for in-person viewing for college hockey games. In your perspective, what does college hockey maybe need to do to, when everything returns back to normal, I should say, to get the herb sold out every night like it used to be?
Yeah, that is a tough question. Everybody's searching for answers. The big change was when the WCHA disbanded, and that was the big turnover. The lure of the Big Ten money took it away, and that was a big killer. And does change, life evolve and change, and that's just part of what happens. And so, is there any easy answer to your question? No. I mean, they're searching for all kinds of different ways to get people in the building. People a lot of times now like to sit at home on their couch and have a beverage on their couch. The games are all on TV. If we go back though, the buildings were always sold out. The Gophers, who had the building always people, so I'd get there early and they're always scalping in front, and now it's a half empty building. And so it's really sad that that's happened, and they are searching, the people in charge are searching for ways, but there's no easy answer to that, Noah.
If there's any consolation, they can just listen to you on the radio, right?
Yes, or you too, yeah. So it's fun, whether you listen on the radio, tune in a game on TV, being there in person is the best. I mean, that is, and we want people to support Husky. We have so many people that are passionate Husky followers and super fans, and so hopefully they'll be able to follow their team this year.
And hopefully we'll have college hockey games, David, as well as having, if they do, fans in the stands as well. Once again, thank you very much, Dave, for joining us. 1991 St. Cloud State Hockey Hall of Fame, as well as current broadcaster. Again, Dave, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Noah.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Take the Huskies Warming House podcast wherever you go. Find the newest episodes or listen to your favorite on iTunes and Podbean. Get all the latest news and updates at huskieswarminghousepodcast.com and look for our Facebook page, the Huskies Warming House Podcast, as well as our Twitter feed at Warming House Den. Our Twitter feed will host trivia, updates, and questions for fans, as well as a mailbag where you can tweet us anytime with your questions, concerns, or listener suggestion. And for business inquiries, email us at huskieswarminghousepodcast@outlook.com.
And again, of course, thanks again to Dave for joining us on the interview segment this week. Always a pleasure sitting next to us a couple of rows down, Noah, at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. Again, Jim Erickson also right alongside us in Radio Row, as we call it. So again, thanks to Dave for joining us, and hope to have him on again. And hopefully we get to see him sooner than later up there in the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. But speaking of college athletes, Noah, the big debate, which has certainly been gaining more steam, is the likeness and, basically college athletes getting paid. And you found an interesting article I think we need to share, and we're going to discuss this on how essentially some politicians now getting involved and why maybe this might be actually a thing in the future sooner than we think.
Yeah, it might be interesting to hear what Dave Reichel would have had to say about this. Of course, 30 years in broadcasting, in college sports. This comes from Center Ice View, of course, our pal Bill Prout, in a quote that he has here on Twitter. I'm going to read it verbatim because I don't think I can explain it any better than how he has. So, Cory Booker, Democrat, New Jersey, and Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, say they will seek to give athletes, quote, revenue sharing agreements, end quote, with the NCAA, conferences, and schools, plus the ability to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness, quote, individually and as a group with minimal restrictions, end quote. So Nick, you're the more legal expert, I would think, out of the two of us. How do you decipher that if you're reading that as the average layperson?
Sure. Well, first of all, revenue sharing, right? And they mentioned at the NCAA, they mentioned the conferences. So they're talking about ad revenue is what they're talking about. Whether it's from sponsorships, I'm not sure if that's ticket sales, maybe merchandise sales, but it's also allowing them to go out and get sponsored individually. So essentially what, in the grand scheme of things, that college athletes might be getting paid. Right now they aren't, and there's a big debate on whether they should or should not. I think the bigger question, Noah, is, how do you decipher the percentages when there's revenue sharing? And I think the bigger question I have is, with schools, and I know that at least for a smaller university like St. Cloud State, people think that they're just swimming in cash. They're not. In fact, when we had a chat with Heather Weems a few weeks ago, she made it very clear that the traditional revenue streams, especially from like state funding, is pretty much gone, and that you're essentially relying on a lot of alumni, you're relying on donors, and again, those corporate sponsorships to really kind of fuel the athletic department. And I'm kind of curious as to what a decision like this, if it actually does get implemented, affects some of the athletic budgets, because that means schools and that money that they're getting is going to be shared with the athletes, and by how much, and as yet to be seen. But I think the idea in principle looks good, but again, how much money are we really talking about? What do you think is fair?
Yeah, well, I think it really starts with scholarships and understanding how many of these guys, are on athletic scholarships. Academic scholarships are a different story. I don't think academic scholarships should be touched because, that just is what it is. You're going to have guys on a team that are 4.0 students. You're going to have guys on a team who maybe they shouldn't have been in college if they weren't a really good athlete. That just is what it is. But I think you have to understand, if you're an organization that gives out athletic scholarships, let's say, for example, you give out a $15,000 scholarship. Well, then if you have revenue sharing where it comes back $7,000 for that athlete, well, then for me, I feel like that's where you start first and foremost, is now that scholarship goes down to $8,000, because as an athlete, you should be taking that $7,000 to help pay for your schooling. For me, if the school is generous enough to give you that scholarship, you shouldn't be taking money from their own revenue sharing in addition. If you're going to take that money, by whatever agreement the school has with the athletes and the NCAA, that's fine. But then I think the first area you have to look is those athletic scholarships. After that, I don't know. I think you have to cap it at a certain percentage. right? Let's say Sam Henches, scores 50 points next year and someone wants to give him $20,000, does Sam Henches get $20,000 where Tyler Anderson gets $1,000 from that same revenue sharing? I think you really have to outline what that cap is. You really have to outline all the stipulations that go into place based on a student who has athletic scholarships, has an academic scholarship, doesn't have a scholarship, what grade level they are in school, what is their position, how much should they play? I think that you have to be so definitive in it. And I know that lawmakers and people who make these policies are going to get to that decision. But like you said, I like the idea in principle, but again, it's almost like the NHL bubble when you and I talked. I'm cautiously pessimistic. What does it look like? Show it to me in writing, show it to me, functioning as a whole unit, and then let's talk.
There's a lot of cans of worms in this type of scenario too. So for example, the university has its own scholarship program, but what about some privately donated scholarships on outside? So when you talk about a cap, do you cap revenue sharing maybe no more than his tuition that he's paying? There's so many things to sort out here. But again, that legislation said also can go individually with minimal restrictions. So if he wanted to sign, let's just say you mentioned Sam Henches, he wants to sign with Gatorade, him by himself, he's entitled to all that money. I think that's fine. I think where the bigger debate and where the bigger discussion is going to be is on that revenue sharing. Again, because these schools they're not getting any outside help, again, from the federal level, from the state level. And to me, when you talk about an education system as a whole, and I think it's got to be brought up in this discussion, that's severely underfunded. No question that on the academic side and the athletic side are two totally separate things. But we talk about how, again, a football team such as a Big Ten school, an SEC school, supports almost 12 non-revenue sports just by itself with some of those, the money that they generate. I think it's worth a discussion to say, okay, well, if we're going to start sharing this revenue with these players now, what are those parameters going to be? And, can the school, is there a minimum the school has to get maybe where they say, this is maybe our operating budget. We have to at least get this plus a buffer or whatever the case may be. There's so much to figure out. I'm not sure if a straight percentage is the way it's to go, but it'd be interesting to see and to watch this. You know what? I'll tell you this. I would be for kind of a mixed duel here. I think a player can, get revenue sharing up to his or her tuition, be capped, and if the rest of there's more revenue, then it goes back to the school. That's the way I would do it, because again, it's the hand that's feeding the kids per se. You can't bite off the hand either in this sort of scenario. So these kids are still getting money. They're still be able to go out and get their likeness and whatnot. So if the Paling trio was still here like they were a couple of weeks ago, wouldn't that have been a fun marketing scheme for those guys? I'm sure they would have banked on that pretty well. But at the end of it, you have to also make sure the school is sustainable, and I think that's the bigger issue that I want to make sure that the schools are taken care of as well.
Yeah, and as an athlete, I don't think you can fault that. Like I paid whatever it was, $14,000 to St. Cloud State University last year. So getting money, part of that revenue sharing, you have to at least be pleased with that. I would think as an athlete, I don't think you'd meet many athletes that wouldn't be pleased about that. And like you mentioned, player likeness. If they have individual deals with Nike or Gatorade or whatever it may be, I think that that's separate. And that is, if you want to create your own brand, so to speak, the Sam Henches brand, you're free to do that. But when it comes to revenue sharing, that's where the meat and potatoes is, because you and I both know, Nick, what a St. Cloud State football game looks like. People coming in as freshmen to that university won't know what that looks like anymore because the football team is no longer there. So you have to, especially when we talk with Heather Weems, you have to have that honest discussion of, how can we use this ability? Because there are people and companies out there that are looking to sponsor collegiate athletes. They're out there. Are they far and wide like they are in professional sports? I don't think that they are, but they're there. And how do you tap into that as a league, as the NCAA, as a conference, as a school, as a community? How do you do that in a way that benefits and highlights the students that you have, give back to them, but also use it in a way to benefit your school so that you can continue to grow and create that healthy community for your student athletes and your regular students and your community, with fan engagement, whatever it may be. So I think it has to, have to be beneficially all encompassing. That I think the question is, how do you do that? Because this is uncharted territory for collegiate athletics. Can you look at the pro model? Certainly, but there are some things that are just going to be different, and that is what it is, right? College hockey players don't sign pro contracts. Their contract, so to speak, is potentially 4 years, maybe 5 if you're a redshirt, and that's it. So, you have to find a way to structure it with the cap, whatever it may be. And I'm certainly the farthest thing from a legal expert. So I'm just going to sit up in the press box and eat my cheese bread from the Herb. And by the way, that cheese bread at the Herb, if you've never had the cheese bread at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center, especially the one nearest to the gate when you're coming down from where the press box is, kind of tucked in the corner there where the elevator is, I'm telling you, the people that work there are fantastic. They make a darn good cheese bread, if I do say so myself.
And you know what, Noah, there's some other challenges too when you talk about a player likeness. Now, the old phrase is money speaks, right? I think the one concern that I would have would be a distraction for the student athletes. You talk about, they already have enough on their plate with trying to, be in class. And, again, you have practices. Their life is revolving around school and sport. There's not a whole lot of extra time that they can spend, but you worry about the time that they do have. What are they focusing on, right? Are they playing video games? Well, imagine this. Let's just say, again, Sam Henches goes out and gets $20 grand from Gatorade. They have Nolan Walker that's getting $3 grand from, let's just say, Adidas. Is there going to be now a discussion in the locker that says, oh, this guy is getting so much money and I can't, is there going to create some kind of a rift in the locker room? Is it really going to be about the game anymore? Or is it going to be about money? So I guess there's a concern I have for that in terms of, we know with young people how they handle their money, right? They're not always, the most forward thinking. There's a lot of glitz and glamour, especially when you're a kid of that age, that comes with, money that's coming at them from essentially for free, right? Especially from sponsorships. And it's like, well, what do I do with this? And I think for me, if you're going to go out and, maybe that one restriction that you get is, even if outside, I would be 100% in favor where if you're going to get a likeness deal from, say, Nike, that all that money has to go to tuition. I would honestly be okay with that because, again, I don't want someone like a Sam Hench to get $20 grand to go out and buy a brand new Jeep Cherokee. I don't really think that does him any good. I don't think that sends the right message. But we all know that student debt in this country, not to get off topic too big, is a huge problem in this country. And, if a team a company wants to pay, a likeness deal, and that money goes to tuition, or maybe you say if it's over that, maybe put it into an athletic scholarship fund where it's continually recycled back into the athletic department, I would be all for that too. So I guess that's the concern that I would have would be on the likeness. What could they use that money for? Can you even restrict that? I think you should, just to, again, you don't want the wrong things to happen with a kid having too much money, and you want to make sure it's going to a good cause. And I think that'd be a good way to do it as well.
Yeah, lastly, on that point, before we wrap up the show, that clause in there too, especially with the player likeness with minimal restriction, I think that's where that maybe, like you mentioned, does need to be modified because, you have to, as a college, in a lot of senses, you're responsible for those players, and kind of how they transition through that stage of their life, at least when they're on campus or in their collegiate events. So, you can't have, Sam Henches is getting a lot of deals today apparently, but he can't be going to Gatorade and filming 10 Gatorade commercials every month while, Nolan Walker goes to practice, takes one picture for Nike and then goes home and, rests and recuperates while Sam Henches is stuck at the rink for an extra 3 hours trying to, get his dough in some respects, or, grab money that maybe he might feel like he needs, and this is the only way he can get it or pay off his tuition or whatever it may be. So, the college has to be really wary of how they protect athletes. And, that really starts, I think, in a similar vein with concussion protocols. It starts with educating the athletes, the coaches, management, the colleges, all of that just has to start with that education. And then you really have to have a firm plan in place, because we've seen that with concussion protocols. If you don't have a firm plan in place, athletes have the potential to get seriously hurt or damaged in the long term. And I don't think it's any different with revenue sharing. So definitely great in principle, just has to be really enacted the right way.
And I think also just it's almost like the NCAA will have to put in some type of, almost like a program or some kind of informational. We talk about the recruiting changes that happened last year, just to protect young players. And you're right, you do have to educate the families, you have to educate the student athlete, and you have to educate also the companies too that maybe want to participate in this, that say, hey, this is, if you want to do this, this is fine, but this is the parameters. It's got to be, regulated. There's got to be checks and balances, because again, you don't want maybe a student athlete to come from maybe at the most, financially advantageous situation to get taken advantage of. They're maybe not going to understand that, with maybe a likeness deal, it's going to come with X, Y, and Z as red tape. You don't want that to be part of it too. That's stress in and of itself. And again, like I mentioned, going to college is stressful enough. Being a student athlete just, multiplies that with all the different responsibilities that you have as an athlete plus a student. So, again, like you mentioned, there's got to be some type of protocol, some nice educational sessions before we get into this. And I think the NCAA, if again, this legislation does in fact indeed get passed, we'll see that. And I think they would have to, because again, the liability, as you mentioned, goes back to the schools and also to the NCAA. But with that, Mr. Noah Grant, we'll keep an eye on that. But again, thanks to all of us and your listeners here for joining us on episode number 24. Noah Grant and Nick Maxon, and we'll see you back next week for episode number 25. Have a great night.